Welcome back to another episode of Inside SFPS. My name is Cody Donarski, Public Information Officer with Santa Fe Public Schools, and today I am joined by a very, very special guest. Today my guest is Miss Anita Hett, who is and was the lead nurse of Santa Fe Public Schools. Miss Hett, how are you today?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for having me today.
I am so excited for this episode. I think I already have it listed as one of my favorite episodes, and I'm 28 seconds into the podcast. So let's get right into it. I think we have a lot to talk about, and Superintendent is probably not going to like this because my guess is this is going to go over 30 minutes. So where are you originally from? Are you originally from Santa Fe?
I was born and raised in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
And did you go to SFPS?
I did.
What schools did you go to?
Well, I started at Southside Elementary School, and that became Chaparral Elementary School. And then I went to DeVargas Junior High, and then Santa Fe High School, graduated in 1983.
When you were in high school, did you know what you wanted to do?
No.
No? Nothing at all?
I wanted to be a mechanic.
Really?
Or a lawyer.
Those are complete opposites ends of the spectrum. So did you go right to college after high school? Did you take a gap year? What happened after high school when you graduated?
Wow, that's a good question. I did not go to college for a few years after graduation. I went straight to the working world, and I worked as a nanny and a hostess at Tony's Pizza.
Is it still around?
No, but some people may remember Tony's Pizza on Cerrillos Road. And then I met my future husband, who is no longer my husband, at Tony's Pizza, and we had a child together. And so I didn't go back to school until after I remarried and had 2 more kids, and was at a point in my life where I felt I wanted to actually go back to school to be a teacher.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. But during the time that I was parenting, I did have my own business as a piano tuner. So I tuned pianos for 20 years. But I also, because I was self-employed, worked at Turquoise Trail Elementary School, the first charter school in New Mexico, I believe, where my kids went to school. And that's kind of where I got my introduction into wanting to work in the schools.
What were you doing at Turquoise Trail? Were you an EA, or what were you kind of doing?
Initially, I was a volunteer, a parent volunteer, helping students with reading and that sort of thing. And then my mother-in-law at the time was working for the retirement board, and she told me, you should try to get a job with the schools, and that way, eventually you'll retire with benefits. And there was an opening for educational assistant for kindergarten, and so that was the start of my career with Santa Fe Public Schools.
Awesome. And then so when you wanted to become a teacher, where did you go to college?
I was just getting my prerequisites taken care of at the community college.
And then after, when you were doing that and you were the EA, or you were an EA, I should say, at Turquoise Trail, when did you get a full-time teaching job, or, what kind of happened around then?
I never became a teacher. Working at Turquoise Trail, I was working in a K-1 classroom where there was a diabetic student, and there wasn't a nurse full-time. And so I was trained in how to take care of a student with diabetes. And that was my introduction into the medical world. It was really rewarding working with this child with diabetes. And then further down the road, not related to school, my stepfather had a stroke, and my sister and I were taking turns giving my mom respite. That's a different kind of care for someone. And one day we were sitting at the kitchen table reporting off to each other, and I told her, gosh, I kind of feel like I could do this. And she's like, me too, I could do this. And we decided at that same time we're going to become nurses. And because we were taking care of my stepfather, and it became something that we both realized we were interested in. Also happened to be a transitional time for both of us. And so when I decided to go to nursing school and transition from being in
teaching and education,
towards education, I talked to the school nurse at Turquoise Trail and told her that what I was planning on doing. And she said, well, you should reach out to Cherie Dotson. She's the lead nurse with Santa Fe Public Schools. And so I did, and ended up getting a job as a nurse aide at Ortiz Middle School.
So that was your first medical job at that time. So at that time you had realized like, this is kind of where I want to go. I don't want to be a teacher. I want to be a nurse. Did you think about blending the two, or when you thought about being a nurse? Because I think the traditional way of thinking is like when you go to nursing school, you go work at a hospital, whether, if in New Mexico it's Press or St. Christus or UNMH or whatever it is. When you had thought about going medical, did you want to go into a hospital, or because your interest in education and medical, you kind of blended it into school? What was kind of the thinking there?
Well, initially when I started nursing school, I was thinking about hospital work. But then as I worked as a nurse aide in the schools, I realized how valuable school nurses are in education. And I knew as soon as I realized that's what I wanted to do.
So when you were at Ortiz, what was kind of the next steps, the next progression for you because obviously we know where you're at now. How did you, what was kind of those next steps after you became the nurse aide?
Well, it was kind of a process. I finished nursing school and had to leave the schools to do my last semester of nursing school. You have to work in a hospital environment or somewhere, where I was being precepted by other nurses. So I went to Christus as a pediatric
nurse?
Well, yeah, a student nurse.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I got my first job as a nurse at Christus in the pediatrics and women's services department.
That's awesome. I have so much respect for the nurses that are in the pediatric unit, and I have one of my best friends, his wife works at the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia in the NICU unit, and I was a NICU baby. My daughter spent a couple hours in the NICU just because her oxygen kept desatting and stuff, and I just, my heart goes out to them because it can be really difficult because when you see the struggles that kids are going with and early on with my daughter, they can't speak, they can't say their pain. And, I have so much respect for pediatric nurses and NICU nurses and everything like that. So what was your experience kind of similar? Was it tough on you? How does that work for someone?
Absolutely. I went into pediatric nursing thinking I'm going to be the nice nurse, and kids are going to like me because I'm friendly and sweet and all that stuff. But then I realized I'm going to have to stick tubes down their nose and they're not going to like me. Mm-hmm. And ultimately it was something I did not enjoy, having to do medical procedures on children. It was too hard on my
heart, yeah.
On my heart, exactly. But I always knew school was really where I wanted to be anyway, and mm-hmm. focus more on prevention. And however, it's a interesting path for nursing, because if you're a nurse, you can graduate from college with an associate's degree and pass the NCLEX and become a full-fledged nurse in a hospital. In the school setting, you're on the teacher pay scale. And so you have to have a bachelor's degree or a master's degree in order to get equal pay as to those working in the hospital setting that don't even have that level of education. So I went back to school.
And so you went back to school to get your bachelor's or master's? My
bachelor's initially. And during that time period, I left the hospital and started working at outpatient hemodialysis and took care of patients who had chronic kidney disease. That was a great experience for me, and I really did love working with those patients and in that facility where I was working. But ultimately, I ended up getting the school nurse job at Santa Fe High. I was working with the school nurse there when I was working towards my bachelor's degree. Mm-hmm. She retired, and it was the perfect opportunity for me to just fall in at Santa Fe High School and work there for a while.
So I asked this question a little bit knowingly, but I think it's interesting because we had worked together maybe 2 years ago now. It's crazy to think about that, on a nurse recruitment video. And it was pretty eye-opening to me because most people probably think of school nurses as, okay, you're putting ice on a kid's head because they fell out of their seat or they bumped their head in gym, or, you're putting a Band-Aid on a cut from, again, maybe gym class or a science experiment or whatever. But what is a day in the life of a school nurse? Because from that video, I learned a lot about school nurses, and that it's not just Band-Aids and ice packs, that there's a lot more to it.
Exactly. The day in the life of a school nurse changes from day to day. You're definitely seeing those injuries and first aid situations, but you're also dealing with students who are living in poverty and don't have their basic necessities for life. And so you're working as kind of like a intermediary between helpful organizations and families to help students get what they need. Because school nursing is about getting kids back to class, healthy and ready to learn. And so if they don't have those basic necessities that they need, they're not going to be able to go to class and be ready to learn. If they don't have a place to sleep, if they don't have a coat, if they don't have food in their belly. And so a lot of people don't realize that school nurses actually help work with families with our Adelante program here at Santa Fe Public Schools to help kids get the basic necessities that they need. Also, you have kids who need their immunizations. We have kids who have medical needs that sometimes the school nurse is the first person to really see signs of illness in a student that could turn into a chronic illness. And so we're constantly observing and monitoring our students to, see what's going on with them from the whole child aspect.
And I think one of the other things, and it's a story that I think either you told or someone else has told me, I don't remember where it came from, but there's also some life-saving as well. And I remember there was an incident at Cesar Chavez where the nurse had to step in and save a young child's life. And it wasn't even a student. I want to say it was a young child that wasn't of school age. Like they were having a medical episode in the parking lot, and the school nurse had heard about it, ran out and saved the child's life. So, it's more than just, again, ice packs and bandages. It covers the full spectrum. And then there's also the education side of it. I think like reproductive education and like teeth brushing. I think I remember I got video of one of the nurses doing teeth brushing and teaching kids how to properly brush their teeth. And some of that, is it preventative care? Is that the right term for it?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So during that video, I really learned like the school nurse isn't just there to send you home or call your parents and say, hey, little Johnny's got a fever. There's so much more that goes into it.
Absolutely. Yeah. In that video, you had examples of students that needed to be fed through a G-tube. You had students who were learning how to care for themselves and how to count carbs, how to measure their insulin dosage and self-administer their insulin. So yes, absolutely, it's a lot more than just ice packs and Band-Aids. Another aspect of school nursing is an administrative aspect where we have to write healthcare plans for students that have chronic medical conditions and are part of the wellness team and part of the SAT team, part of the 504 committee. There's so much more to being a school nurse than just ice packs and Band-Aids. So as you were school nurse at Santa Fe High, did you have any greater aspirations, or were you kind of just like, I'm good with this. Like, this is what I wanted. This is what I wanted to do. Like, I'm good here. What was kind of in that part of your career, what was kind of going through your head? Right. I was still in school. I had finished my bachelor's degree and I was starting on my master's degree. And I had heard that our lead nurse was getting ready to retire. And I had actually worked with her very closely when I was working at Ortiz. She took me under her wing essentially from that moment on. And so I learned a lot from her about leadership and about all of the aspects of school nursing. And so when I heard she was retiring, I got excited about it, but I knew the job would require for me to have my master's degree or at least be a nationally certified school nurse. So I started to work in that direction. And at that time, I kind of got a little perturbed, I guess is the word, with the system that we had in terms of advancing within the district. I found out that the only way that I could advance to level 3 was if I had been working for 3 years and had to submit a portfolio and all of this other stuff. And so I thought my chances of being lead nurse are null and void. So I got frustrated and I left and I went back to dialysis. And I worked there for about, I guess, 6 months when I got a phone call from one of the nurses from Santa Fe High or from Santa Fe Public Schools saying that Cherie was definitely retiring and that they were having a difficult time finding applicants. Yeah, qualified applicants and people that wanted the level of responsibility. So I thought, well, I am working towards my master's. Maybe they'll take
Honor
me
that,
seriously. Yeah. And so I did interview for the position, and Cherie was actually ready to leave no matter what because she was ready to retire. And after, I think she'd been here for 18 years and had led the district, in a great way, creating a lot of important things that are still in place today.
So,
right.
yes.
Yeah. So Robert Knott from the New Mexican called me because Cherie told him I was going to be the lead nurse, but I hadn't heard anything from HR.
Yeah.
And so when he interviewed me, I just told him that I used to work with Cherie and blah, blah, blah. It sounded like I was going to be getting the job for lead nurse, but wasn't quite sure. I didn't find out until about 2 weeks before school started that that I was going to be the school nurse. But I was grateful because it gave me enough time to give notice to the dialysis clinic. I was nervous. I'd never worked in a leadership position. I mean, I was one of the clinical nurse leaders at the dialysis clinic, but that's quite different than school nursing.
Yes. What year was this approximately?
2014, 2015, I think.
Okay.
No, 2014.
Okay. So in 2014, 2015 areas when you became lead nurse.
Correct.
What was kind of that role change? Because you're no longer in the schools. You're not being, probably if I had to guess, as hands-on with students as you were previously. So what kind of became the role of lead nurse? More of a
supervisor in that sense, but also a teacher. So I did ultimately end up becoming a teacher. Yeah. As a matter of fact, my master's in nursing is in nursing education. Oh. And so a lot of what I do as the lead nurse is guide our nurses in their practice, provide professional development, hopefully provide role model for nursing. It is difficult to do when you aren't working in the schools, and so I have always tried to make sure that I still have a hand in there and I sub in the schools so that I do actually have some interaction with students. Currently, I'm teaching the growth and development classes for Desert Sage, and I will be teaching at Nava next week. So, I'm still in doing the hands-on.
You're not just doing the paperwork. You've made it so that you can still kind of enjoy the being present and being in the schools without being just in one place, I guess, would probably be the best way to describe it.
Yeah.
So, obviously, when you became lead nurse, you probably didn't foresee a global pandemic coming down the road. So as the lead nurse, you kind of became the medical expert / go-to for the district. And that's where you and I became really close because as the communications person, I would say throughout 2020 and 2021, we were probably on the phone once a day, if not, once every other day.
That's true.
What kind of changed in your role, and maybe talk a little bit about that end of February, early March, when things were kind of starting to swirl and, I don't want to call them rumors because they weren't rumors, they were true, but, conversation was like, okay, this thing is serious and what's going to happen. And then the closing of schools and, talk a little bit about how your role changed because at that point, you weren't teaching growth and development classes. You were kind of on the front lines of of school safety and student safety and staff safety.
Right, right. I remember exactly when I realized that things were changing. I was subbing at Santa Fe High School because we did not have a school nurse there, and we had a student who had transferred, who there was a lot of question because they had come from Hong Kong and they didn't know, what is the protocol? How do we deal with this?
And when was this? January, February, March? What time was this?
This was probably in January.
When it was still pretty...
Yeah, when it wasn't here yet.
Yeah.
But realizing, well, we've got people coming that might be infectious, and it really rattled people. People were visibly shaken, not knowing what to do and how to deal with the situation. And then basically, just said, don't worry about it. If they're symptomatic, then we'll find out, but we really didn't know a lot about COVID at that point in time. But everything worked out with the student. Everything was fine, obviously. And actually, the father in this case was very knowledgeable and was very helpful to me during that transitional period because they had come from
the epicenter, close to the epicenter, yeah.
Exactly. I remember maybe it was in January, I got called to a meeting. And all of the district leadership was in this meeting, and Dr. Garcia was there. We were all there to plan what we were going to do. You were there, I'm sure. It was the facilities and maintenance.
I don't know if I was, because when I had started with the district, I started January of 2020. And I was the digital communication specialist. The community engagement department was there. There was a chief community engagement officer who was the cabinet member at that time for the department. So it was probably David Carl who was at that point. But, I had just come on with the district, and I remember we'd walk, and, it was a topic that everyone was talking about because it was starting to pick up steam. And I remember as time kind of went on, once we got to the end of February, early March is when things got really serious.
Right, yeah. Well, Dr. Garcia wanted to get as ahead of it as possible. So she gathered everybody together and was, trying to direct what we're going to do. We're going to have to figure all of this out, anticipating school closures and all this stuff. They wanted to know things about spread rates and all of this stuff. And all of a sudden, everybody's eyes are on me.
Yeah.
And I'm going, well, this is what we do. It's a communicable disease, so we have to find out exactly what's going on. We have to communicate with the Department of Health, get guidance from them. And that was when it just kind of struck me that my role has completely changed. In a way, though, because as lead nurse, you're leading and you're guiding protocols for communicable disease control. We'd never obviously dealt with it at this level. But I did remember before I started, I'd heard all of the talk about H1N1 and how things had been done. And all of these things started to come back to my mind about points of distribution and how I knew Santa Fe Public Schools had points of distribution where the Department of Health would come in and they would administer vaccines. But at that point in time, there was no vaccine.
There
were no vaccines.
But you had previous knowledge from what the district was doing from your time here, and you were able to go back into your brain and be like, oh, I remember this was something we did. We can implement it, or whatnot.
Right, and that's really what we did. Was we remembered that there was a toolkit per se for H1N1, and so we went back and looked at what were the protocols back then, and what do we need to do to create protocols for Santa Fe Public Schools. And I remember several meetings in the boardroom trying to come up with our plan. And with Dr. Garcia's leadership at that time, we were way ahead of other districts in the state. It was phenomenal. But what happened too, from a statewide perspective, is that all the nurse leaders from across the state started to meet regularly so we could talk about what is my district doing, what is your district doing, so that we could kind of work together as possible, because every district kind of
has their own unique challenges and, differentiations and, anything really. I mean, you look at us to Deming or Columbus or Alamogordo or Farmington, what works in Santa Fe might not work in Farmington, what might not work in Gallup, and so on and so forth.
Right. And we also did a lot of research. And when I say we, I'm talking about my nurse leadership team, because we really needed to figure out how to deal with communicable diseases in the school at this level and all of that. And so we did a lot of research into what other school districts are doing. And so, it just came rolling at us, and we just had to react and do whatever we needed to do so that we could keep our kids and our families, our community safe.
And, I don't want to spend too much time on this because, your career and what you have done is much bigger than just the pandemic, but, with your retirement coming up, which I should say, congratulations.
Thank you.
It's kind of going to be the final chapter of this career is, you had, your school nursing, your aide, all of that, the dialysis, and then a global pandemic is going to be the final and probably longest chapter of your career. But it's an important one because at that time, it really pushed school nurses to the forefront of everyone's mind.
It sure did.
I don't want to say that they were never thought for or anything like that previously, but it was kind of like, oh, we have a school nurse. The nurse helps take care of these things and they worry about it. But during the pandemic, it was, where's the school nurse? Who are the school nurses? Who do we need to contact? Like they became, honestly, probably the principal, any assistant principals, and then the school nurse was probably the next most important person at that school. So the pandemic really drove nursing to the forefront of everyone's mind.
That's true. Yeah, the school nurses became the gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. And so in a way it was a good elevation, but in some ways it wasn't so good because sometimes people didn't want to follow the guidelines, they didn't understand the guidelines, and the nurse was telling them, listen, your child can't be in school for 10 days, and the parents going, well, how am I supposed to function? And it was a very, very difficult time for school nurses, for all school staff, teachers, administrators, all of that.
So I want to move away from that. I'm glad we touched on it because it is a really important part. And, I don't want to say the pandemic is over and I don't want to put any finality to it, but, we've moved past a lot of kind of the biggest hurdles that we had through the pandemic. Right. So I want to move past that. There's 2 or 3 things that I want to touch on before we wrap up, which is completely different than your nursing career, is your singing. You are a fantastic singer. I know there's been a few instances. I know you and your daughter had sung a song for, I believe it was Dr. Garcia's retirement video. When had you always been a good singer? Was it something you learned to do or you found later in life? Like where did singing come from in your life?
I have been singing since I was in my mother's womb. And I mean that. Yeah. My mom and dad met at the Santa Fe Opera. They were in the premiere of Wuthering Heights, and my dad was actually working on the set, and my mom was an accomplished pianist and vocalist, but my dad was too. And
that's where the piano tuner came from, right?
Yes. My mom owned a business in Santa Fe selling pianos, and
you tuned them.
Yes, natural progression. And my dad, after meeting my mom and everything, they ultimately ended up obviously getting married and having children, but he sang as a traditional New Mexico troubadour at Rancho de Chimayo. He sang there for 29 years, I think. Mm-hmm. He sang with Geneva Chavez. A lot of people know her as Genoveva Chavez, the wonderful fiesta singer. But she was part of my family growing up because she was in my dad's singing group. And so anyway, I come from a very musical family, and so I've been singing my whole life. I used to sing with the Santa Fe Women's Ensemble, which is a professional singing group. My sister and I have a little group that we do called Blue Spring. We do music with my family at every single gathering that we have. So, yeah, I've been singing my whole life.
I just wanted to touch on that because it's so beautiful, and I remember we were at Marty Chavez Links to Santa Fe, or Marty Sanchez.
I think Marty Sanchez.
We need to edit that out. We were at Marty Sanchez Links to Santa Fe for some sort of retreat in leadership, and it was Carl Morano's birthday. And I made sure to call you up so we could sing happy birthday because my voice is not a singing voice. I have a very nasally voice that is just not made for singing, and I knew you had a very beautiful voice. So just wanted to touch on your singing for a little bit. So the last two things we'll do before we wrap up. With your retirement coming, I pulled this card from the We Are Not Really Strangers game, and I think it's kind of fitting for someone into retirement. Describe your perfect day, but we'll say your perfect day after retirement.
Right. Well, I want to focus on relationships. So my perfect day would be going to visit my sister in Hawaii with my husband. And
she lives in Hawaii?
Yes, my sister lives in Hawaii half of the year. So going to Hawaii and sitting by the beach, sipping a Mai Tai, and watching the beautiful sunset over the ocean.
That's all you need to say. You don't need breakfast, lunch, dinner. Just have a Mai Tai in the morning, a Mai Tai in the afternoon, and a Mai Tai at night for dinner.
Well, probably eat some time in between those.
Yes. And so the last question we will wrap up on is, well, first let me say thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time. I know you are super busy. There's vaccination clinics and everything going on. So I appreciate you cutting out a little part of your day to spend some time with me talking about this. So the last question that I have for you is, what is the best piece of advice or guidance that you've ever received from a teacher, or I'll throw in a mentor?
I would say the best piece of advice I have ever gotten from a mentor or a teacher is to be myself. That's it. Just be yourself. You're good enough.